Time for another sword review with epic background. Last time I recorded in this location, people were asking if this was a green screen. Well, it would be pretty impressive editing skills if I could do this with a green screen. This one's been a long time coming. Haven't had a chance to finish testing and reviewing it until now for the reasons I've described in an earlier video. If you haven't seen that, link below. This was sent from Yomikuni.com as a total surprise. I had no idea this was coming. This suddenly arrived in the mail. I was like, what? Huh? What is this? Usually I start these reviews with the materials. Unfortunately, I don't know what kind of steel this is made of. It's pattern welded steel, but they don't say which particular steels they have pattern welded. I'll add it if I find out. The fittings seem to be bronze, although it could be aged brass, I suppose. Apparently there are fittings sold at a Chinese online store which look exactly like this, which are apparently electroplated zinc aluminum alloy. Cost 10 to 15 bucks. In order to try to verify that, I took some steel wool to this collar here, and indeed the layer comes off and it reveals gray metal underneath. So as far as I can tell, this really does seem to be electroplated aluminum alloy. So obviously it's a way to reduce costs, and it makes me wonder where else they might have cut corners, which may not be obvious. I mean, this is not technically a functional issue. It doesn't compromise the integrity of the sword as such, but it is a bit of an odd choice, particularly considering that every time you sheathe and unsheathe this sword, this is going to rub metal on metal. So over time, this is just going to rub off and it's going to show the gray underneath. It would have been better to actually use brass, actual bronze or aged brass. For the rest, would definitely have been nicer as well. These floral ornaments are basically washers that the metal pin is peened over. So that's what secures the grip, full tang, and then the pins are driven through. This attachment here, which I'm assuming might be for a lanyard or a strap that is supposed to go on the wrist to secure the sword, basically tied to your hand. In terms of rattle, there really isn't any, as long as I hold on to this. Yeah, there's really no movement. The fit in and of itself is extremely tight, but it doesn't really retain it very well. Could be intentional for easier draw. It can be hung from the belt by the suspension, or it could just be tugged into the belt or sash. It's basically about arm's length, a little bit more, depending on your arms, of course. It's got a Tanto style point. Apologies for mixing up cultures here. I don't know the Chinese term for this kind of shape. Tanto style is also used for knives, so I'm just going to stick with that. And it's a very simple grind. So you've got basically a flat bar of steel that's only ground at the very end, single bevel. The blade is pretty thick. You can see the spine here. It does seem to have a distal taper sitting out toward the point. It's very gradual and thereby pretty subtle. I'll put the measurements in the description down below, along with the other specifications. Weight-wise, even though it's fairly thick, it's not heavy, of course. It's a compact sword. The balance is not very close to the hilt, though, which you really don't want for this kind of sword. You know, it's already quite short, and it doesn't weigh all that much, so you need a certain amount of blade presence. It's of course fast, so very agile sword, doesn't take any effort to move around, but as said, at the same time it does have, feels like a pretty authoritative cut. Overall, I think this is relatively similar to a short messer or a long Bauernwehr, and it can very well fulfill the same kind of role. More about that later. I mean, in actual design, it has really nothing to do with either a messer or a Bauernwehr, other than the fact that it's relatively compact and single-edged. Everything else is different, of course. What I mean is the overall application as easy to carry civilian self-defense sword. I very much like the handling of this sword, with one exception, and you might be able to see that. It is a bit of a hand destroyer. Definitely not the most comfortable handle you could have. After just a couple of swings, it's already beaten my hand up to the point of drawing blood. Not only do you have the race skin, which is quite abrasive, intentionally so, for better traction, and then you also have these ornamental fittings here. When you pick it up at first and move it around, it's not really a problem. It's pretty comfortable. It's a very well-shaped handle. Just the right kind of ratio between thickness and width, in my opinion. So gives you a really good feel for the edge alignment and feels good as such. But yeah, as you keep using it, and it doesn't take that long, you definitely feel your hand getting chewed up a little bit. I don't know if it's designed with gloves in mind, but either way, something to point out. So, on to the cutting. I had to do the abusive testing first, which went very well. I, as usual, gradually ramped it up. First, just cut some pretty flimsy branches and small tree limbs, and then ramped it up more and more as I felt that there wasn't really any issue, there wasn't any undue vibration, nothing seemed to be loosening up, and with a blade of this thickness, you really don't have to worry. This is quite stout. With extreme use, particularly, chopping into thick pieces of wood, which of course is abuse, it's not what it's designed for. That could potentially bend it, but I think it would take quite a lot for that to happen. It's really sturdy overall. To a fault, I would argue, because cutting is not fantastic against soft targets. Yikes. Let's see if I can just power through. All right. It's not a nice cut. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to sharpen and retest it, and also with the current apartment, it's not great to try to use the work sharp. Either way, this is what you're getting, which is important to point out. A lot of people tend to say, well, you need to sharpen it and then test it. Well, no, I need to give you an impression of what you can expect out of the box. If you know you're good at sharpening, it's not an issue either way. The blade geometry is definitely designed with strength in mind. This kind of thing, where almost all of it is just a flat bar and then it tapers just this little bit, it just can't cut as well as a sword that tapers into a thinner wedge, basically. So yeah, this is definitely the main focus here, is something that is pretty much indestructible. From the chopping tests, there was absolutely nothing on the edge, no damage. I was going to say no dulling either. Well, it is already dull, so what can you say? But yeah, you could hone this some more. Even with this kind of grind, you can still put a shaving sharp edge on it. It is worth criticizing, in my opinion, because they should have spent a bit more time working on that apex of the edge. There's a little bit too much thickness left there. And like I said in the cutting video, tatami is not at all like the human body, so not being able to cut tatami mess very cleanly doesn't mean that it wouldn't be effective in actual combat against a human opponent. So this would still work decently well, unless the opponent is wearing padded armor, or maybe even just particularly sturdy, thick clothing, winter clothing and such. I don't think this would get through. This is just too dull. And from my tests, it became clear that you need quite a sharp edge to be able to really slice through padded armor, or even just a few layers of sturdy fabric. Again, this is pretty much a tank of a sword. No problem there whatsoever. It looks very nice. The decorations are done tastefully, like not excessively, but just to give it a little bit of ornamentation. The scabbard, like I mentioned, is really nice, and no rattle, perfect fit, just doesn't hold on to it. that tightly. And like I alluded to earlier, this is really ideal for a civilian self-defense kind of sword to carry. Or at court, I suppose. Something that is just not an encumbrance at all. If you wanted to insist on being an edgelord, you could wear it on your back too. And it is short enough that you can actually draw it that way. So for ease of carry, this is great. It has almost no guard, so it's not going to snag on your clothing or hit you in any way or get caught, anything like that. It's not going to poke you in the side, etc. So this is very easy to carry in a number of different ways, possibly concealable too, under a coat perhaps. It's light too, so this is the kind of sword that you can easily carry if you don't expect to be attacked, but just in case want to wear something like this in a historical or fantasy setting for that matter. So what about the historical accuracy? It's going to be limited how much I can say about this because I don't know that much about Chinese history. However, if we go by the name, Liyan Ren from 2016 is a live-action web drama based on an animated series with the same name. As far as I can tell, there don't seem to be any swords in there that look like this. I mean, I haven't watched those, but the screenshots I could find of the swords and that look quite a bit different, like an overall style. However, there is a movie titled The Longest Day in Chang'an from 2019, a historical suspense drama. And there's a scene in there that gives context to the length here, because the commander of the crime-fighting Liyan unit has an unusually short sword, and the background is that as a soldier, his commander wanted to humiliate him by giving him such a short sword because he claimed that he was a coward who would just stay behind and wouldn't actually fight, so he doesn't need a full-sized sword. Interestingly, the design of that movie is based on an original historical dao, which looks quite a bit different. It has a bent handle, and they stuck very close to the original for the movie sword, apparently. This, on the other hand, looks completely different. Short dao did exist in the Tang dynasty. Now, this example is even shorter than the one we've got here. The hilt here is very similar to a Tang dao in a museum in Nara, Japan, although that one has a much longer blade. So in terms of accuracy, as far as I can tell, again, take that with a grain of salt, this seems to be all over the place. It's similar to some originals, but deviates from it. It references historical fiction, but also seems to look different. All right, so what's my verdict on this? Well, in terms of functionality, it's very durable, strong construction, hard to damage. So you can totally abuse it if you want, although it's a little bit too fancy for abuse, I would think. Cutting performance, yeah, at least the way it comes. If you work on it, if you hone the edge some more, it might be okay. As it comes, not really fantastic for cutting. So I'm not really sure who this is for. It's not accurate enough for collectors. It's not that great for cutting, not just because of the dull edge that it comes with. Again, you can fix that, but also because it's a remarkably uncomfortable handle. I don't know. On the one hand, I appreciate the solid construction. The fit is perfect. Finish overall is quite nice. And it's great to have such a robust blade. On the other hand, the apparently very cheap fittings. There are some concerns about this, so I'm not sure I'm really comfortable recommending it. It's not terrible by any means, but it's not great either, which is a bit of a shame because I do like the concept overall. Also considering the lack of information on the website, this is not great. If you just look at the description there, it looks like it might just be some auto-translate, and there's just not enough. It needs to tell you what steel it is and what materials in general. If it is electroplated aluminum alloy, they should point that out. They should tell you what it is exactly. Just folded steel is not enough. We need to know which steels are pattern welded together. And generally, I would advise caution whenever you do see something like that has minimal information. I would have been even more skeptical if I hadn't tried this. That's really what redeems this. You know, seeing how well it holds up to testing, even hard testing, that's really its main strength. And it looks nice. Anyway, I don't think I can say much more about this, so hope you found it helpful. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks.